Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen and I'm here today with my 2023 wrap-up, which is mostly going to consist of an entire year flip-through of my reading journal. I started a reading journal for the first time last year, and so I thought it would be fun to save it and flip through the whole thing as my wrap-up for 2023. So I won't be doing some of my usual wrap-up things like talking about the most exciting videos I did this year and stuff, because I think flipping through this thing is going to take a really long time. But I will give just a couple of small channel updates here at the beginning, try to get through them quickly. First off, last year I dropped from doing a video every Saturday to just 3 videos a month, and this year I'm going to drop the amount again, and I'm only going to be doing 2 videos a month. So I'll be doing my wrap-up at the end of the month, every month, and then just one other random video, whatever I feel like posting that month, whether that be a tag or a tier ranking or whatever. But that being said, I do have some new videos that I'm going to be doing for the first time, some of them a little bit more ambitious. I'm planning to do a few reading vlogs for the first time ever. I've never really wanted to do reading vlogs before because I don't really even enjoy watching them, and they also just seem like a lot of work. But I do have 2 books coming up that I'm excited about and that feel a little bit special, and so I'm doing reading vlogs for them. And then the other new type of video that I'm going to be trying this year is a TBR game. Lots of booktubers have TBR games, and I've always thought they looked pretty fun, but I've just never really seen one that I felt like would work well for me. But towards the end of last year, I had an idea for one, and I got pretty excited about it, and I do think it will work well for me. So I'm going to start doing that this year, but it's not going to be every month because there are some months that I just already have plans for. For example, there are a few different authors that I'm working my way through all of their books, and so like Fredrik Backman, for example, I read one of his books every November. So any month where I have any pre-planned books, I will not be doing my TBR game. So my first TBR game video will still not be for a couple months yet because I do have plans for the beginning of the year already. And then also any month where I have time for more books than what is either pre-planned or what my TBR game gives me, I will revert back to my regular way that I do my TBR. So once again, just making my TBR as complicated as I possibly can. But there will be more details to come about the game when I post my first video where I play the game. And so I think that is all of my channel updates, and let's dive right into the reading journal flip through because I've already talked for too long at the beginning here because like I said, I think this flip through is gonna take a while. So yeah, hello everyone. This is my reading journal. I'm a big fan of spiral notebooks, which I don't think is super popular for reading journals, but yeah, I'm a big fan of them. So with the cover, I just added like a little hint of color here and there, but I didn't want to go too crazy because this is already an intense design. I unfortunately, at the very end of the year, somehow stained the cover, which makes me very sad. Notes for next year's journal. But yeah, starting off, we have just my cover page here, which is a little bit plain. I wish I had tried harder and didn't like just do plain pen, but I did put my channel name here, and my husband actually came up with the idea of adding small pictures for each book that I read. So for example, the very first book I read last year was The House in the Cerulean Sea. So I really loved that idea, and I'm gonna do that again next year, but obviously it didn't fill up very much of the page. So I tried with next year's, oops, I'm bouncing this around a lot, sorry. I tried with next year's to fill up with this design just a little bit more of the space. But then over here on the inside cover, I have my book bingo, which it's on the inside cover because I had already done all of my like before the monthly spread pages, and I hadn't thought that I wanted to do a book bingo, but then I changed my mind, so I just stuck it here in the front cover, which I think actually worked out really well. But part of the reason that I wasn't sure if I wanted to do one is because with things like this, I knew I wasn't actually going to put any real effort into completing the prompts, which I did not do. I didn't do that for any of these like challenge type things. But it's still fun to keep track of, even if I don't go out of my way to read books that fill in the prompts. And I did clearly still reach a lot of the prompts. even though I didn't specifically read anything just to fill in a prompt. Like, I have a very specific way that I do my TBR, and I wasn't gonna deviate from that just to fill in a book bingo. But yeah, I still ended up with 5 bingos and 4 corners. I was honestly pretty close to getting a blackout, but that's it for the first page. And then the next spread was my monthly reading plan and 23 books for 2023. So the monthly reading plan, I filled out ahead a lot, but it's not like I had all this written down like in January. Just whenever I kind of would figure out what came next. And then the 23 books for 2023, I did put kind of a little bit of special effort into the ones that had been left over from 2022, and I did manage to do them all. And this was actually the first year since I've been doing this, which I've been doing this since 2020, like on Instagram. So this was the first year where I actually read them all, and I don't think I'm gonna do this spread next year. I'm kind of done with doing this, and since I did complete them all, it feels like a good place to stop anyways. So this spread will be here next year, but this one will not. And then after that, we just have my reading goal, which was 45 books, which is different than the 23 for 2023. This was 23 specific books that I wanted to read, whereas this was just a number goal. Like, it didn't matter what books it was specifically. And I completed my goal and actually surpassed it by 5 books. So that was great, 50 books this year. 45 is pretty much always my goal because I have to stretch for it a little bit, but it is usually attainable. And to me, that's the perfect goal. Something that you know you can attain, but you do actually have to put some concerted effort into it. And yeah, how I set this reading goal page up was obviously just to put the titles, and then I would add the star rating after I read the book. And the colors don't really mean anything. It was just kind of whatever color I felt went nicely with the book. So I'm changing that next year. Next year, I am going to do the color based on the genre, because on the next page, I have a genre tracker, and sometimes a book will fall into more than one genre, but I only really want to just pick one for the tracker purposes, whatever I feel like the main one is. But sometimes it was hard for me to remember what I picked. Like, for example, Dread Nation. Is it historical fiction? Is it horror? You know, it takes place around the Civil War and it's about zombies, so it could fall into a lot of categories. So there were a couple different books where I would be not sure if I could remember how I categorized them, and it just became a little bit hard to keep track of. So I think next year, if I color these in the genre that I'm choosing to label them as, that'll help me keep track. And then my next spread is a sideways spread, and it is my book face-off. So every month I would pick my favorite book of the month, and then they would face off, and then these 3 faced off, and boom, we get to my favorite book of the year. A lot of people do this spread, and my favorite book of the year was Imposters, which was a reread. I couldn't decide if I should include rereads in this or not, and I decided to include them, obviously. But yeah, for a while there, I wasn't sure if I wanted to include rereads or not, because I do kind of feel bad that like my top 2 books of the year were both rereads. So then my next spread, which we've already gotten a peek at, of course, was my genre tracker, which fantasy was my top genre of the year this year. And below that, I put in a series tracker. This was another like last minute add. At first, I just was leaving this blank, but having a little bit of blank space was kind of annoying, and so I decided to throw in a series tracker. And then over here on this page, we have my A to Z spread, which a lot of people, again, do this spread. It's basically just trying to read a book that starts with every letter of the alphabet. And again, did not put any concerted effort into this. If I happened to read a book that was a letter I hadn't done yet, I filled it in, but I wasn't gonna go out of my way to get Z or whatever. But all things considered, I still, again, did pretty good. And then we have my reading world domination map, in which I kept track of books that took place in different countries or were by authors from different countries. and I got 6% world domination this year. And then after that, we have this little insert here. And this was another case of me not thinking of wanting this until after I had already started my monthly spreads. So I just added a little insert. And so this is an author tracker and also a Barnes & Noble Book of the Year tracker, because I've been trying to read their Book of the Year every year. So on the inside, we have Frederick Bachman, and if it's a series, I have multiple dots to fill in: V.E. Schwab, Leigh Bardugo, Rainbow Rowell, John Green, and Patrick Ness. And I'm going to reevaluate this author tracker this year. I might get rid of some of the authors, I might add some new authors. For example, TJ Klune is one that I'm certainly going to add. And then yes, like I said, at the end here we have the Barnes & Noble Book of the Year, which actually this isn't fully up to date because I have now read World of Wonders and Under the Whispering Door, and I just started lessons in chemistry today. But moving on to my monthly spreads. Of course, we start off the year with January, which I just did a snowflake theme. Although I did not carry any of my themes throughout like the rest of the month for the most part. But every single month I have this little like stats spread, which I do work on it throughout the year and make changes and improve it and get more comfortable with it as the year goes on. But at the top of the page, I always would make a monthly TBR, and then I would have stats, books read, pages read, average rating. And then I would have these stats: male versus female author, fiction, nonfiction, or poetry, person of color, LGBTQIA+. I ended up adding to this later on. And then down here, I added this later and it gets moved up here for the rest of the months. Reread versus first time read. And then at the bottom, we have my star ratings for the month. And this is just how many books I rated at what stars. And then at the very bottom, books acquired. And I ended up in later months adding books acquired and books unhauled. But yeah, I'm not gonna go through these in too much detail every single time, or even, you know, break down, because you can see it. But my first book of the year last year was Milk and Honey, which I'm not hugely into poetry, but I've been trying to get myself a little bit more into poetry. This one was okay. I did write down some specific poems or quotes from poems that I liked, and then also I did like some of the drawings in the book. And then yeah, this is kind of my setup for all of my books. I'll put, you know, the title at the top, my star rating with a few little thoughts, and then either drawings or quotes or just whatever stands out. Then after that we have The House in the Cerulean Sea by, as I mentioned, TJ Klune, 5 stars. My first book of the year this year was Behind the Whispering Door, also by TJ Klune, and also 5 stars, which is why he's being added to my author tracker list. And then I reread Dear Martin, a 5-star read, because I was so excited to be reading the sequel for the first time this year, which I only gave 4 stars. It wasn't quite as good as the first one, but I did still enjoy it. And then after that, The Poet X. I did enjoy novel told in verse much more than just plain poetry, so that was nice. I think I will definitely be trying more novels told in verse. And then we're on to February. This is my least favorite monthly spread. And then these are my February stats. I like for sure keeping track of acquired and unhauled because it's nice to try to make sure that I'm reading / unhauling more than I am acquiring. But yeah, the first book I read in February was Percy Jackson, and I also went to a stage production of it, so that was kind of fun to pair them that way, but I'm just not a Percy Jackson fan. I've tried a couple times in my life to get into it, and it's just not really for me. And then after that, I was rereading Imposters because I was going to be finishing the series for the first time ever, which Imposters is a spin-off of Uglies, a very popular YA dystopian series from back in the day. So I knew that Imposters would be 5 stars. And I knew that Shatter City would be 4 because it's just kind of messy. And Mirror's Edge was also 4. I think this was my first time reading Mirror's Edge. The first two were rereads and the final two were first time reads. And then yeah, the finale for the series was a pretty big disappointment. Tally being there, the character from the original Ugly series, was really the only draw for me. And then moving on to March, which I tried to get a little bit more creative with my monthly spread on this one, with cutting out these leaf pictures. And once again, here are my March stats. This idea that I have at the top of a lot of months, I did not think of until December. I didn't really think of it. I saw it on somebody else's reading journal. They had little string Christmas lights on their December spread, and I thought that would be fun to do for as many months as I could think of what I could string up there. But yeah, my first book of March was This Is Where It Ends, and this is the blankest book spread that I have in the entire journal, because this book was just kind of a nothing burger. So I kind of like the blank page because of how aptly it represents the book for me. But later in the book, I did start occasionally doing half pages and having one book on top and one on bottom. And I wish I had thought of it earlier, because then I wouldn't have been wasting as much space. And then after that, I read Dread Nation, which I quite enjoyed. I think I'll be reading the rest of the series hopefully this year, but I might not get to it till next year. And then my first nonfiction book of the year, I think, was Eats, Shoots, and Leaves, which is a grammar book. So I wrote down the funnest fact that I learned from the book. And then the final book of May was The Grace Year, which made me think of this like little poem from the visual album Lemonade by Beyonce, the little Dear Moon poem. So I printed out a picture from Lemonade to put on this page to remind myself that that's what the book made me think of. And then I included the quote that it made me think of. And then we have our April spread, which is one of my favorites because we just have a cute little Frodo down here. My husband got me a little printer for my birthday, and so that's when you see actual photos starting to pop up, because I started to use that for my reading journal. And then we've got my April stats. And my first books of April were Vicious and Vengeful, and I really like how this spread turned out. And I also enjoy how it bled through for Vengeful. It definitely looks better on the Vicious side, but I don't know, I just liked how they coordinated together. And then I also read The One Memory of Flora Banks that month, which was a reread. And finally, 13 Reasons Why, and I just kind of listed out the 13 reasons. And then we have my May spread, just a simple little vase of flowers, which is very cute, I think. So I went for the obvious here. I had my April showers and my, May flowers. So here are my May stats. And the first book I read in May was a 5-star read and is also just one of my favorite spreads. I love how this metallic Sharpie turned out on this black paper. And then in May, I also read the entire Eden trilogy by Joy Graceffa. This is a YA dystopian series that was pretty silly, but also pretty fun, and mostly just really pretty. Like, I love the color scheme. That's why I included a printout of all 3 covers of the books, because I did not keep these books because I didn't like them very much, but I just could not part with having the covers somewhere available to me. I mean, I know I could always Google them if I wanted to look at them, but I like having the covers of this particular series in my reading journal. And then, of course, we finished off Eden. And this is also around the time when I finished The Fellowship of the Rings. I started reading the Lord of the Rings series this year. I'm going through it extremely slowly. So it took me, that many months, almost half the year, to finish the first book. And yeah, I rated it 2 stars, which I know is a crime. I promise I love the movies, which is maybe also a crime, but the books are just very slow. And then after that, I did an almost mid-year review, just because this was such a good breaking point that even though it was a little bit early, I wanted to just do my mid-year review here. So I just wrote down a bunch of facts and figures. I wanted to know how many I'd acquired and read and unhauled, and just kind of get a check-in with the different challenges I was doing, and then also do some more fun graphs because I like graphs. But you can see here in the first half of the year, dystopian was my top genre. In the second half of the year, fantasy took over. And then, so this was just like in the journal. I did not do this, but I decided to add my own little quote on the other side of the page because I figured why not, even though it is rather hard to read. And I did specifically want to pick a quote from something I had read so far that year, so I did something from Lord of the Rings. Moving on to June. This is one of my favorite spreads. June has always been my favorite month, partly because growing up I did plays at the Rose Theater, which was my local theater growing up, and so I figured it would be perfect to just print out a picture of the rose for June. And those are my stats for June. Started June off with The Black Kids. I ended up having a lot of book spreads involving glasses or sunglasses. This was the first one, I think. Then after that, I read The Anthropocene Reviewed, for which I just did a lot of quotes because it's highly quotable. And then Love and Luck, which I think is a really cute spread. The book was just okay, but the spread I love. And Good Behavior, which I printed out kind of the main advertising photo for the TV show because the TV show is why I read the book. So I thought it'd be nice to show the reason that I read this book. And then we have July. These are supposed to be fireworks, not bombs. My husband thought I was drawing bombs. And these are my July stats. And we have our second set of sunglasses here with My Sister, the Serial Killer. And then after that, I read The Invention of Wings. I usually, with my spreads, try to evoke the color schemes of the book. So that's why there's so much orange highlighting on this one. And then yet another pair of sunglasses with American Royals. And I read Michael J. Fox autobiography this year. I feel like there were a few books in July that I maybe could have just done a half-page spread, but I hadn't thought of that yet. But this is my August spread, which I really like this one. I've had this paper and a few other papers that were in the same like little pack that I got for such a long time, and I'm glad that I used it here. But yeah, these are my August stats. I reread Divergent in August, and I did not reread any of the other books in the series because I didn't even like Divergent as much as I remembered, or as much as I used to, rather. I definitely did like it more than 2.5 stars when I was a teenager, but not so much anymore. It didn't really hold up, and I had already remembered that the second and the third I didn't even enjoy very much the first time around. They were just very, very slow for me. And so I was already somewhat dreading the slog of reading those two. So then when Divergent ended up kind of being a slog too, I was like, I just can't do it. But after that, I read a few Disney books, the first one being Fairest of All. These movie tie-in type books just generally aren't my thing, so I wasn't super surprised that this one was not my favorite. I did like the other one that I read better, which was Reflection, a Twisted Tale. So I definitely would recommend Twisted Tales over the Villainous series, because like the beginning of this book was fantastic. It was just the middle kind of dragged it down and brought it down to 3 stars. But moving along, this is my September spread, and these are my September stats. I acquired a lot of books in September because my aunt gave me a bunch of books, and I read Before I Fall in September, and I also think I rewatched the movie. I know I tried to rewatch the movie, but I don't know if I ended up being able to find it on streaming or not. Regardless, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the movie. I had watched the movie years earlier, and honestly kind of surprising because I'm not big on Groundhog Day type stories, but I did like this one. And then after that I read Red Queen, and I will be completing this series. The first book was good. Like, I enjoyed it. It's fun. It's definitely very YA dystopia of the early, 2010s or whatever. But what can I say? I love a good YA dystopia, or even a mediocre YA dystopia. And then after that I read The Mothers, which is literary fiction, which is not always my thing, but this did have some good stuff in it. And then moving on to October, another of my favorite month spreads. This was from our wedding, oh gosh, I can't think of the word. The little pamphlet that you hand out that says when everything is gonna happen. This is from that for our wedding, which we got married in October of the previous year, so it was just appropriate to do some wedding stuff for October. And then this is also one of my favorite, one of these. I did some Soot Sprites from Studio Ghibli, and yeah, these are my October stats. I wanted to read Ninth House and Hellbent, but they are chonkers, so I was feeling kind of a time crunch. And then also, I liked Ninth House, but I didn't love Ninth House. It's a chonker. So yeah, I'm gonna reread Ninth House next year and finish up Hellbent. I don't have as many like other books that I'm wanting to read next year in addition to those two. I definitely wanted to get to my Grady Hendrix books because I had gotten them the previous Christmas from my mother-in-law, so I wanted to get them read. But my Ninth House spread is maybe my very favorite spread in the entire reading journal. I don't know, I just think it's beautiful. Nothing like a good silver Sharpie on black paper. And then my Final Girl support group spread, not so much my favorite. This is my attempt at a chair. And also not my favorite book of the year. I only rated it 2 stars. I did not like it as much as I hoped I would. Horror is another genre that I'm very finicky about. But Horrorstör, I enjoyed very much. 4 stars. So I wouldn't completely give up on Grady Hendrix after these 2 books, but I didn't receive any for Christmas this year, so I don't know when I will ever read another Grady Hendrix again. And then we have my November spread. I got this little letter seal set in the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in Orlando during mine and my husband's first anniversary honeymoon. So I thought it would be fun to use it in my reading journal, and this is where I used it. And these are my November stats. I reread the entire Inkheart trilogy in November, and I also finally finished up Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. But we started with Britt Marie, and as you can see, I have a lot more text on this page than usual. These are all the different quotes in which the book was saying what it meant if you were a fan of various soccer teams. I really liked that like metaphorical resonance that strung throughout the entire book, and so I just wrote down every quote that involved that. And then we have my Inkworld spread, which I love. And this is also the first time that I thought of doing half-page spread, because Inkheart is my favorite by far. I actually ended up unhauling the second and the third, so I don't know, I just was like, I don't want to waste 3 whole pages on this trilogy. I also wouldn't mind if I could look at them all at once, and honestly, Inkheart's the only one that I feel needs a whole page, so that's how the half-page idea came about. But I do just love how the spread looks. And this was a childhood favorite series. It had been a very long time since I had reread it. I think I only read Ink Death once back when it came out, because again, I didn't love the second and the third books. They're just kind of slogs to get through. So it was nice to finally reread them. And I did hold on to the first book because it is still 5 stars for me. And then finally, last but not least, we have my December spread, which I literally just used Christmas wrapping paper for. And I addressed it to myself from The Grinch, because The Grinch is my favorite Christmas movie. And then these are my stats for December, and this was the actual first string light that I added to a monthly spread that I then just back added to previous months. I read a lot of books in December, and I rated them all 2 stars. I tend to read a lot of children's books in December because it is cozy, but at the same time, it doesn't always go super well. But I started off with Indigo's Star, which I did not love, but it did make me think of this little video that was produced by the company Hit Record, which is owned by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, several years ago, in which a girl talks about seeing the stars for the first time because she's night blind. And the video was starring Elle Fanning, and I really loved that video. and Indigo Star just made me think of that video, so I printed out a screenshot from it. And then after that, I did another half-page spread for Black Beauty and the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Did not have a lot of thoughts about either of those. And then after that, I read Skipping Christmas, which was my final book on my December wrap-up. And I rated it with snowflakes instead of stars. And I also cut out the cover of the book and pasted it in because I'm getting rid of the book, but I thought the cover was so pretty that I wanted to keep it. So I committed a bit of a crime. And then my actual last book of the year that did not make it into my December wrap-up because I had to shoot that video early was World of Wonders, which just wasn't for me, really. It wasn't bad, but it just wasn't my kind of book, really, although I did enjoy the artwork. And then after this, we're moving into my 2023 wrap-up. So I printed out myself a little Spotify Wrapped inspired cover page for the wrap-up, and also tore some pages out of the Final Girl support group, again, committing crimes. But I wasn't keeping this book, and I accidentally spilled a bunch of water all over it because I traveled with it and water got spilled in my bag. So I figured if there's any book that I can tear pages out for decorations, it's this one. But moving on to the actual wrap-up, I tried to be very colorful at the end here and put a little bit more effort into the year wrap-up than I did into the mid-year wrap-up. So I did like a whole graph for my books acquired, TBR books read, and books unhauled. I noted that I did my 23 books for 2023, read 50 out of 45, 111% of my goal. Thank you very much. I got my quintuple bingo. I had to Google what is 5 for that word. Like obviously double, triple, quadruple. Did not know quintuple, but all I had to do was think of Disney movie quints. And then of course I also got 4 corners on the bingo. And then I noted which letters of the alphabet I got. I got 20 out of 27, which is 74%, which for putting 0 effort into it, I think is not bad. And then I did a little graph for my series tracker, noted my 6% world domination, and of course did a genre breakdown, and we can see here where the fantasy surpassed the dystopian with contemporary YA tied there. And then we've got my little trackers here, which mostly read fiction, obviously had a pretty even spread between male and female authors. This I would like to do better on, but I don't think this is terrible. I added disability at the very end of the year, so that one's tiny because I wasn't even tracking it for most of the year. And then yeah, my reread versus first time read. I would really like this to be more like 1/4 of it is rereads, but that did not work out. And then my average star rating for the year was 3.4, very average. My best month was January and April at a 4-star average rating, and my worst was, of course, December, in which I rated every book 2 stars. And then I also have my books read versus pages read, which November is inaccurately high because that's including like the second Lord of the Rings book, and yeah, so obviously I didn't read the entire book of that in November. But then after that I did another little Spotify Wrapped situation with my top authors and my top books, my pages read, and my top genre. And then I did some book superlatives like you would find in a yearbook. So Biggest Flirt, American Royals, I really enjoyed the romances in that book. And then Best Dressed I gave to The Grace Year. I think it's a very pretty cover, although House in the Cerulean Sea could also definitely contend for that spot, but that one got Best Laugh, so this was the funniest book I read this year. I gave Life of the Party to Imposters because it's just such a fast-paced, fun read. Most Likely to Be Famous I gave to Lord of the Rings because I feel like that's probably the most famous book I read this year. And Most Academic, of course, went to Eats, Shoots, and Leaves because it's, I think, the only educational nonfiction that I read this year. And that is it for my entire reading journal, my first year of ever reading journaling. I'll do like a quick little... I really love it. It has been so much fun, and I'm looking forward to doing it again next year. And I will give you just a sneak peek of next year's title page. So this is next year's title page. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to fill up a little bit more of the space. I added a sticker. I did this in Sharpie rather than pen. So yeah, I'm liking this. And I found another book that I'm tearing pages out of, forgive me. And I've actually drawn my first little drawing for the year because I've already finished a book for the year, and that was Under the Whispering Door. Got a little cerulean colored teacup. But yeah, that was my entire reading journal. I hope you enjoyed. I think this journal will last me all of next year as well, because I did use up slightly less than half of it for 2023. What?
Your dad's coming down and taking care of all other car things, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, close the door.
Forever, why?
Because I'm already filming.
Oh. Wow, cut that off.
I will.
Remove that.
So that was it for my entire reading journal flip through. I hope you enjoyed watching. Remember, words matter.